The blizzard hit without warning on that February day in 1883, turning the Wyoming plains around Lusk into a white nightmare that swallowed everything in its path. Eleanor Morgan had been delivering medical supplies to the outlying ranches when the storm descended, her wagon lurching through deepening snow as her horses whinnied in protest. She was 22 years old, a woman who had learned medicine from her father before consumption took him 3 years prior, and she had been making her rounds when the temperature dropped so fast she could feel the cold seeping through her wool coat like water through cheesecloth. The wind howled across the open prairie with a fury that seemed intent on erasing all traces of civilization, and Eleanor knew, with a sinking certainty, that she had made a terrible mistake leaving town that morning. Her fingers ached as she gripped the reins, trying desperately to see through the wall of white that surrounded her. The horses were struggling now, their breath coming in great plumes of steam that vanished instantly into the swirling snow. Eleanor's own breath came in sharp gasps that burned her lungs, and she could no longer feel her hands properly. The leather reins felt like iron bars in her grip, and when she tried to flex her fingers, they barely responded. The wagon lurched violently as one wheel hit a hidden rock or depression, and Eleanor was thrown sideways. She managed to hold on, but the supplies in the back scattered, bottles of laudanum and packets of bandages disappearing into the snow. The horses were panicking now, pulling in different directions, and Eleanor knew she was losing control. She pulled back on the reins with all her strength, but her frozen hands could barely maintain their grip. Then the wagon tipped. Eleanor felt herself flying through the air, the world spinning in a confusion of white and gray. She hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Snow immediately began to cover her as she lay gasping, trying to remember how to breathe. Her hands were completely numb now, useless appendages that she could see but not feel. She tried to push herself up, but her arms trembled and gave out. Through the screaming wind, she heard the horses neighing in terror, heard the crack of breaking wood as the wagon continued to tumble. Then even those sounds faded, replaced by the relentless howl of the storm. Eleanor tried to call out, but her voice was stolen by the wind. She was alone on the prairie, freezing to death, and no one knew where she was. She thought of her small house in Lusk, the medical practice she had fought so hard to establish in a town that was not entirely sure a woman should be doing such work. She thought of the patients who relied on her, of old Mrs. Henderson who needed her rheumatism medicine, of the young Cooper boy whose broken arm she had set just last week. She thought of all the things she still wanted to do, the lives she still wanted to save. Her eyes were growing heavy when she saw the shape moving through the snow. At first, she thought it was a hallucination, some trick of her freezing mind. But the shape grew more solid, resolving into the form of a man on horseback. He was bent low over his mount, his hat pulled down tight, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He was riding slowly, methodically, as if searching for something. Eleanor tried to call out again, and this time a thin sound emerged from her throat. It was nowhere near loud enough to carry over the storm, but somehow the rider's head turned in her direction. He urged his horse forward, and moments later he was dismounting beside her, dropping to his knees in the snow. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" His voice was deep and steady, cutting through the chaos of the storm. Eleanor managed to nod, though even that small movement seemed to require all her remaining strength. The man was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw and serious gray eyes that assessed her condition with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to emergencies. "We need to get you out of this weather," he said, already beginning to lift her. "My name is Harrison Lawson. I have a line cabin not far from here. Can you hold on to me?" Eleanor tried to grip his coat, but her hands would not respond. She looked down at them and was startled to see they had turned a mottled blue-white color, like bruised ice. Harrison followed her gaze and his expression grew grim. "Your hands," he said quietly. "How long have they been like that?" "I do not know," Eleanor managed to say through chattering teeth. "Cannot feel them." Without another word, Harrison scooped her up completely, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to his horse. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding, well trained enough to stand steady in the storm. Harrison managed to mount while still holding Eleanor, settling her in front of him and wrapping his coat around both of them. The warmth of his body was shocking against her frozen skin, and Eleanor found herself pressing against him instinctively, seeking that heat. "The cabin is just ahead," Harrison said, his breath warm against her ear. "Stay with me. Do not close your eyes." Eleanor had not realized her eyes were closing until he spoke. She forced them open, watching as Harrison guided his horse through the blinding snow with a confidence that suggested he knew every inch of this land. True to his word, a structure began to emerge from the white, a small log cabin that looked like salvation itself. Harrison dismounted with Eleanor still in his arms and kicked open the cabin door. Inside was dim and cold, but at least it was sheltered from the wind. He laid Eleanor on a narrow bunk along one wall, then moved with swift efficiency to build a fire in the small stone fireplace. His movements were practiced, and within minutes flames were crackling, sending blessed warmth into the space. Only then did he return to Eleanor, kneeling beside the bunk to examine her properly. His face was weathered from sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his life outdoors. There was a seriousness to him, a quiet competence that Eleanor found herself trusting immediately. "We need to warm you slowly," Harrison said, already removing her wet coat. His hands were gentle but firm as he worked. "Too fast and you will be in worse trouble. Your hands especially need care." Eleanor watched as he unwrapped the scarf she had been wearing and then carefully removed her gloves. Her hands looked even worse in the firelight, swollen and discolored. Harrison sucked in a sharp breath when he saw them. "This is bad," he said honestly. "Have you got any medical training? Do you know about frostbite?" "I am a doctor," Eleanor managed to say. Her teeth were still chattering so hard it was difficult to speak. "I know, need to warm gradually. Need to keep circulation." Harrison's eyebrows rose in surprise. "A lady doctor, in Lusk?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "Eleanor Morgan." Recognition flashed across Harrison's face. "I have heard of you. You are the one who saved Tom Parker's life when he got kicked by that horse last summer." "He is my uncle." Eleanor remembered Tom Parker, a gruff older rancher who had been skeptical about letting her treat him until blood loss had left him no choice. She had stitched up the deep gash in his thigh and watched him for infection, and he had survived thanks to her care. "Small world," Eleanor whispered. "Smaller than you think out here," Harrison said. He had found a basin and was filling it with water that he set near the fire to warm. "Uncle Tom talks about you all the time, says you are tougher than most men he knows." He glanced at her hands again, his expression troubled. "We need to get these warmed up proper. It is going to hurt." "I know," Eleanor said. She had treated frostbite before, knew the agony that came as frozen tissue thawed and blood flow returned. But she also knew that, without proper treatment, she could lose her hands entirely. Harrison returned to the bunk with the basin of lukewarm water. "Ready?" he asked, and when Eleanor nodded, he gently lifted her hands and lowered them into the basin. The pain was immediate and excruciating. It felt as though her hands had been plunged into boiling oil rather than tepid water. Eleanor gasped, her back arching off the bunk, and Harrison immediately moved closer, supporting her hands in the water while his other arm went around her shoulders. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it hurts. But you have to keep them in the water. You know you do." Eleanor did know, but that knowledge did nothing to make the pain more bearable. Tears streamed down her face as sensation began to return to her frozen flesh, bringing with it a burning agony that seemed to consume her entire awareness. She heard herself making small sounds of distress, hated herself for showing such weakness, but could not stop. "Look at me," Harrison said firmly, and when Eleanor managed to focus on his face, she found his gray eyes steady and calm. "Look right at me. You are doing fine. You are strong. This pain means your hands are coming back, means they are going to be all right." "It hurts," Eleanor gasped. "I know it does," Harrison said. His hands were so warm where they supported hers, careful not to rub or press too hard. "But you are going to get through this. I have got you." Those words, spoken with such absolute certainty, became an anchor in the storm of pain. Eleanor focused on Harrison's face, on the steadiness in his eyes, on the gentle strength of his hands supporting hers. Minutes passed, each one an eternity, but gradually the worst of the burning pain began to fade into a throbbing ache. "That is better," Harrison said, watching her face. "Color is coming back. Can you feel your fingers?" Eleanor concentrated and was relieved to find that she could indeed feel her fingers, could even wiggle them slightly, though it hurt to do so. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I can feel them. Good. That is real good." Harrison lifted her hands from the water and wrapped them carefully in a clean cloth he had warmed by the fire. "Now we just need to watch for blisters and keep them clean. You know the drill better than I do, being a doctor and all." Eleanor nodded, exhausted from the ordeal. Her whole body ached, and she was starting to shiver again despite the fire. Harrison noticed immediately, pulling several blankets from a chest in the corner and layering them over her. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said matter-of-factly. "I will turn my back. There is a dry shirt of mine you can put on. It will be too big, but it is better than freezing." He was right, of course. Eleanor's dress was soaked through, and the wet fabric was leaching away her body heat. As Harrison turned to face the wall, she struggled to undress with her still clumsy hands. Her fingers would not cooperate with the tiny buttons, and after a moment of frustrated fumbling, she had to ask for help. "I cannot manage the buttons," she admitted, hating how helpless she sounded. Harrison turned back, his expression carefully neutral. "May I?" he asked, and when Eleanor nodded, he set to work on the buttons with a clinical efficiency that suggested he was determined not to embarrass her. He kept his eyes on his work, helped her out of the wet dress and into his dry shirt with as much care as if she were his sister, then quickly turned away again so she could remove her wet undergarments and wrap herself in the blankets. "All right," Eleanor said when she was decent, and Harrison turned back. If he was at all affected by the situation, he did not show it. Instead, he hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry and set about making coffee from supplies he kept in the cabin. "This is a line cabin for the Parker Ranch," Harrison explained as he worked. "I ride fence out this way regularly, checking on cattle, making sure everything is secure. I keep it stocked with basics in case I get caught out here." He glanced toward the window where the storm was still raging. "Which happens more often than I would like." "You work for your uncle?" Eleanor asked. Her voice was stronger now, though her hands still throbbed painfully. "I do. Have been since I was 16. My father died when I was young, and Uncle Tom took me in, taught me the ranching business." Harrison poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to Eleanor, helping her hold it since her hands were still weak. "I have been saving to start my own place eventually, but that is still a ways off." Eleanor sipped the coffee gratefully, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "If you had not found me, I would have frozen to death out there." Harrison looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "I was out checking on strays when the storm hit. Saw your wagon tracks and figured someone was in trouble. Just lucky I found you when I did." He paused. "What were you doing out there anyway? Most folks have sense enough not to travel when weather looks bad." "It did not look bad when I left town this morning," Eleanor defended herself. "I had deliveries to make. Mrs. Henderson needs her medicine and the Taylor baby has croup. They depend on me. They would rather have you alive than have you die trying to bring them medicine," Harrison pointed out, but his tone was gentle rather than scolding. "This country does not forgive mistakes, Doc. You know that." Eleanor did know that. Wyoming in winter was unforgiving and the prairie could kill in 100 different ways. She had been foolish to venture out alone, foolish to think she could outrun a storm. If not for Harrison, her stubbornness would have cost her life. "You are right," she admitted. "I was reckless. I just hate to let people down." "Being dead would let them down more," Harrison said practically. He settled into a chair near the fire, cradling his own coffee cup. "How did you end up as a doctor anyway? Cannot be easy for a woman." "It is not," Eleanor said. "My father was a doctor and I learned from him. After he died, I took over his practice. Some people in Lusk accept me. Others think I am overstepping my bounds." She looked down at her bandaged hands. "But I am good at what I do. I save lives. That has to count for something." "It counts for a lot," Harrison said quietly. "Uncle Tom would not be here if not for you. That counts for everything to me." They fell silent, listening to the storm rage outside. The cabin was small but well built, and the fire was keeping the worst of the cold at bay. Eleanor felt exhaustion creeping over her, the aftereffects of the trauma her body had endured. "You should sleep," Harrison said, noticing her drooping eyelids. "Storm like this could last hours yet. We are stuck here until it blows over." "What about you?" Eleanor asked. "I will keep the fire going," Harrison said. "And I will keep watch on your hands, make sure they are healing proper. Go on, Doc. You need rest." Eleanor wanted to argue, but her body was making demands she could not ignore. She settled back against the blankets, her bandaged hands resting on her chest, and let her eyes close. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Harrison's face, illuminated by firelight, his expression thoughtful as he stared into the flames. When Eleanor woke, the cabin was dim with twilight. The storm had finally passed, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. She could hear Harrison moving around, and when she turned her head, she saw him adding wood to the fire. "How long did I sleep?" she asked, her voice rough. Harrison looked over, a slight smile crossing his face. "Few hours. Storm just stopped maybe half an hour ago. How are your hands?" Eleanor carefully unwrapped the bandages and examined her hands in the firelight. They were still swollen and tender with some blistering on her fingertips, but the color was much better. She flexed her fingers experimentally and was relieved to find she had reasonable movement. "They will be all right," she said with relief. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to getting them warmed fast enough," Harrison corrected, but he looked pleased. "You will need to keep them clean and wrapped for a few days. Probably should not be doing surgery or anything like that for a bit." Eleanor nodded. She knew he was right, though the thought of turning away patients made her anxious. "I will manage. I can still supervise treatment, even if I cannot do everything myself." Harrison brought her more coffee and some jerky from his supplies. "Sun will be setting soon. We should probably stay here tonight and head back to town in the morning. Your clothes are dry now, and you can travel, but I would rather not risk it in the dark with snow this deep." The thought of spending the night alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew should have concerned Eleanor, but somehow it did not. Harrison had been nothing but respectful, had saved her life without expecting anything in return. She trusted him in a way that surprised her. "That makes sense," she agreed. "Will your uncle worry about you?" "He knows I can take care of myself in the backcountry," Harrison said. "And he knows about this cabin. If anything, he will figure I hold up here to wait out the storm. What about you? Will people worry?" Eleanor thought about her small house on the edge of Lusk, about the housekeeper who came in twice a week but was not due until Friday. "Not until tomorrow when I miss my morning appointments," she admitted. "I live alone." Something flickered across Harrison's face, an expression Eleanor could not quite read. "Must get lonely," he said quietly. "Sometimes," Eleanor admitted, "but I have my work. That keeps me busy enough." They shared the simple meal in companionable silence. As full darkness fell, Harrison pulled out a deck of cards and they played poker by firelight, using matches as currency. Eleanor discovered that Harrison was a terrible bluff, his honest face giving away every good hand, and she could not help but laugh when she won for the 5th time in a row. "You are robbing me blind," Harrison complained, but he was grinning. "Here I save your life and you repay me by taking all my matches." "I am a card sharp," Eleanor said solemnly. "It is a little-known fact about lady doctors. We are all gamblers at heart." Harrison laughed, a warm sound that filled the small cabin. "I will have to warn Uncle Tom. He will be disappointed to learn his savior is a scoundrel." They played a few more hands, and Eleanor found herself studying Harrison when he was distracted by his cards. He had a good face, she decided. Honest and strong, with a quiet confidence that did not need to boast. His hands were weathered from work, but they had been so gentle when they held hers in the water, so steady when the pain was worst. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, catching her staring. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Just that you have kind hands," she said honestly. "For a rancher." Harrison looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "My uncle says a man's hands tell you everything about him." "These hands work hard, but they know how to be gentle when gentleness is needed." He met her eyes. "Like when a calf is being born, or when a horse is spooked, or when a lady doctor is in pain." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with something Eleanor could not quite name. She was suddenly very aware that they were alone together, that she was wearing his shirt, that they would be spending the night together in this small space. "I should probably get some more sleep," she said, breaking the moment. "My hands are aching." "Of course," Harrison said, immediately businesslike again. "You take the bunk, I will sleep in the chair." "That is not fair," Eleanor protested. "This is your cabin, I should take the chair." "Not with injured hands you will not," Harrison said firmly. "Besides, I have slept in worse places than a chair. Spent 3 days in a tree once, waiting out a flood. Chair is luxury compared to that." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she could see the stubborn set of his jaw and knew it would be useless. Instead, she settled back onto the bunk, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Harrison moved to the chair by the fire, stretching his long legs out toward the warmth. "Harrison," Eleanor said into the darkness. "Yeah, thank you for everything, I mean it." "You are welcome, Doc," Harrison said softly. "Now get some sleep." Eleanor closed her eyes, but sleep was elusive now. She found herself listening to the sounds of Harrison's breathing, the crackle of the fire, the wind whistling around the cabin's corners. She thought about his hands holding hers, about the way he had looked at her across the card game, about the warmth in his gray eyes. She was still thinking about those things when she finally drifted off. Morning came cold and bright, sunlight streaming through the cabin's small window to paint stripes across the floor. Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and when she sat up, she found Harrison at the small stove, cooking breakfast with the efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. "Morning," he said, glancing over with a smile. How are the hands? Eleanor examined them carefully. The swelling had gone down considerably overnight, and while they were still tender and the blisters were visible, she had full movement in all her fingers. Much better, she said gratefully. I do not think there will be any permanent damage. That is real good news, Harrison said, genuine relief in his voice. Had me worried last night when I saw how blue they were. Thought for sure you would lose at least a few fingers. Your quick thinking saved them, Eleanor said. If you had tried to warm them too fast, or if I had been out there much longer, it would have been much worse. Harrison brought her a plate of bacon and hardtack. Eat up. We have got a long ride back to town, and you need your strength. They ate quickly, and Eleanor dressed in her now dry clothes. Her dress was wrinkled and stained, but it was far better than riding into town in Harrison's oversized shirt. Harrison saddled his horse and helped Eleanor mount, then swung up behind her. The gelding was strong enough to carry them both, though Harrison made sure to take it slow through the deep snow. The prairie was transformed by the blizzard, drifts piling high against every obstruction, the whole landscape gleaming white under the brilliant sun. It was beautiful in a harsh way, but Eleanor could not look at it without remembering the terror of being lost in the storm, the certainty that she was going to die out here. You all right? Harrison asked, feeling her shiver. Just remembering, Eleanor said quietly. Harrison's arms tightened around her, steadying her against his chest. You are safe now, he said. I have got you. Those words again, spoken with such conviction that Eleanor felt her fear begin to ease. She leaned back against Harrison's solid warmth, letting herself take comfort in his presence. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the crunch of snow under the horses' hooves and the occasional whistle of wind across the open land. There is your wagon, Harrison said suddenly, pointing to a shape half buried in snow. The wagon was on its side, one wheel broken, supplies scattered and half covered by drifts. The horses were nowhere to be seen. They must have broken free and headed back to town, Eleanor said, surveying the damage. I will need to send someone out to salvage what they can. I will do it, Harrison offered. Once I get you back safe. No sense letting good supplies go to waste. They continued on, and by mid-morning the buildings of Lusk came into view. The town was digging out from the storm, people shoveling snow from storefronts and checking on neighbors. As Harrison guided his horse down the main street, heads turned to stare at the sight of the lady doctor riding double with Tom Parker's nephew. This is going to cause talk, Eleanor warned. Let them talk, Harrison said easily. You needed help, I helped you. Nothing shameful in that. He stopped in front of Eleanor's house, a neat white clapboard structure with a sign hanging out front that read Dr. Eleanor Morgan, physician. Harrison dismounted first, then carefully helped Eleanor down, mindful of her still tender hands. You should have someone look at those hands, he said. Another doctor, I mean. Make sure I did everything right. You did everything perfectly, Eleanor assured him. But I will have Dr. Winters from the next county come take a look when he visits next week, just to be thorough. Harrison nodded, but he seemed reluctant to leave. They stood on the wooden sidewalk, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Harrison cleared his throat. I should probably check in with Uncle Tom, let him know what happened, he said. But I would like to call on you sometime if that would be all right. Make sure you are healing up proper. Eleanor felt her heart skip. I would like that, she said softly. Very much. A slow smile spread across Harrison's face, transforming him from handsome to breathtaking. Good. That is real good. How about tomorrow evening? I could bring supper from the hotel. That sounds perfect, Eleanor said. Harrison tipped his hat to her, mounted his horse, and rode off down the street. Eleanor watched him go, her bandaged hands pressed against her chest, feeling something warm and hopeful blooming in her heart. The next few days passed in a blur of patients and visitors. Word had spread about Eleanor's close call with the blizzard, and people kept stopping by to check on her, bringing food and expressing concern. Mrs. Henderson arrived with a pot of soup and scolded Eleanor for putting herself at risk. Tom Parker himself came by, his weathered face creased with worry. "My nephew told me what happened," the old rancher said gruffly. "Said you nearly froze to death out there. That boy saved your life." "He did," Eleanor agreed. "I owe him everything." Tom studied her with shrewd eyes. "He has taken a shine to you, I reckon. Was asking all kinds of questions about you, what kind of person you are, whether you were being courted by anyone." He grinned suddenly. "Boy has got it bad, if you ask me." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "He is very kind." "Kind does not cover half of it," Tom said. "Harrison is the best man I know. Honest, hard-working, loyal, treats animals and people with equal respect. Any woman would be lucky to have him." "He is coming to supper tonight," Eleanor admitted. Tom's grin widened. "Is he now? Well then, I will get out of your way. Let you pretty yourself up." He paused at the door. "For what it is worth, Doc, I think you two would be good for each other. You are both too serious, too focused on work. Could use someone to share the load with." After Tom left, Eleanor found herself looking at her reflection in the mirror, trying to see what Harrison might see. She was not beautiful in the conventional sense, she knew. Her face was too strong, her hands too work-worn, her manner too direct. But Harrison had looked at her like she was precious, had held her hands with such tender care, had smiled at her like she was the best thing he had seen in a long time. She changed into her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and took extra care with her hair, pinning it up in a soft style that was more flattering than her usual severe bun. Her hands were healing well, the blisters beginning to fade, and she was able to manage the buttons herself this time. Harrison arrived precisely at 6, carrying a basket that smelled heavenly. He had cleaned up too, his hair still damp from washing, his best shirt pressed and neat. When he saw Eleanor, he stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening. "You look beautiful," he said, and the simple honesty in his voice made Eleanor's breath catch. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "You look very nice yourself." They ate in her small dining room, the meal from the hotel proving to be roast chicken with potatoes and fresh bread. Harrison had even brought a bottle of wine, which Eleanor poured into her good glasses. As they ate, they talked about everything and nothing. Harrison told her about growing up on his uncle's ranch, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the satisfaction of working with animals and land. Eleanor told him about her father, about watching him treat patients and knowing from a young age that she wanted to do the same, about the struggle to be taken seriously as a female physician. "You know what I admire most about you," Harrison said as they finished the meal. "You do not give up. You could have married, could have let some man take care of you, but you chose to stand on your own to fight for what you believed in. That takes real courage." "I never wanted to be taken care of," Eleanor said. "I wanted to matter, to make a difference." "You do matter," Harrison said earnestly. "You matter a lot, to this town, to your patients." He paused, his gray eyes steady on hers. "To me." Eleanor's heart was racing now. "Harrison." "I know we just met," Harrison said, leaning forward. "I know this is fast. But when I found you out there in that storm, when I saw your hands frozen blue and thought you might lose them, might lose your ability to do the work you love, something happened to me. When I held your hands and helped you through that pain, I knew I wanted to keep holding them. Keep being there for you." He reached across the table, offering his hands palm up. "If you will let me." Eleanor looked at his hands, strong and calloused, the hands that had saved her life and held her when she needed it most. She placed her own hands in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. "I would like that very much," she whispered. Harrison stood, drawing her up with him, and for a moment they just stood there, hands clasped, looking into each other's eyes. Then slowly, carefully, Harrison pulled her closer, giving her every chance to pull away. When she did not, when instead she leaned into him, he wrapped his arms around her and held her close. Eleanor rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady thump of his heart, feeling safe and cherished in a way she never had before. Harrison's hand came up to stroke her hair, gentle and reverent. "I will court you properly," he murmured against her temple. "I will do this right. But I need you to know, Eleanor Morgan, that I am serious about this, about you." "I am serious too," Eleanor said, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "I never thought I would want someone in my life this way, but with you it feels right." Harrison's smile was tender as he cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Eleanor nodded, her eyes drifting closed as Harrison's lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, sweet and questioning. But when Eleanor responded, wrapping her arms around his neck, it deepened into something more passionate. Harrison kissed her like she was precious, like he wanted to memorize every detail of this moment. And Eleanor kissed him back with all the emotion swelling in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Harrison rested his forehead against hers, his hand still framing her face. "Stay a while longer," Eleanor said. "We could sit by the fire, talk more." They settled on her sofa, Harrison's arm around Eleanor's shoulders, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder. They talked until late into the night, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other's histories and hopes. Eleanor told Harrison about her fear that she would never find someone who understood her dedication to medicine, her worry that she was too independent to ever fit into a traditional marriage. Harrison told her about watching his father die from a hunting accident, about the fear that he would end up alone like so many cowboys did, growing old with nothing but cattle and horses for company. "I do not want that kind of life," Harrison said quietly. "I want a home, a family. I want someone to build something with, someone who challenges me and makes me better." "I want that too," Eleanor admitted, "but I will not give up medicine, I cannot." "I would never ask you to," Harrison said fiercely. "What you do is important. It is part of who you are, and I would not want you any other way." Those words settled something deep in Eleanor's chest, some fear she had been carrying for years without even realizing it. She turned her head to kiss Harrison's jaw and felt his arms tighten around her. When Harrison finally left, well after midnight, he kissed her once more at the door, long and sweet. "I will see you tomorrow," he promised, "and the day after that, and the day after that." True to his word, Harrison came by every evening that week. Sometimes he brought supper. Sometimes Eleanor cooked for them, but always they spent hours talking and laughing, learning each other's minds and hearts. Harrison helped Eleanor reorganize her medical supplies after she got them back from the wagon wreck, listening with genuine interest as she explained the purpose of each instrument and medicine. Eleanor visited the Parker Ranch and watched Harrison work with the cattle, admiring his patience and skill. On Sunday, Harrison invited Eleanor to have dinner with him and his uncle. Tom Parker welcomed her warmly, clearly delighted that his nephew and the doctor were courting. Over a meal of beef stew and cornbread, Tom shared embarrassing stories about Harrison as a young boy, while Harrison groaned and threatened to stop helping with the branding if his uncle did not behave. "Tell me, Doc," Tom said as they finished their meal, "what are your intentions toward my nephew?" "Uncle Tom," Harrison protested, mortified, but Eleanor just smiled. "My intentions are entirely honorable," she said solemnly. I intend to court him properly, treat him with respect, and see where this leads us." Tom laughed, slapping his knee. "I like her, Harrison. She has got spine. You better hold on to this one." "I intend to," Harrison said, meeting Eleanor's eyes across the table. As the weeks passed, Lusk grew accustomed to seeing Harrison and Eleanor together. He would ride into town every evening, and they would walk together through the streets, talking and holding hands. On Sundays after church, they would have picnics when the weather allowed, or spend the afternoon in Eleanor's parlor reading together when it did not. Eleanor's patients noticed the change in her, the happiness that seemed to light her up from within. Mrs. Henderson commented that love agreed with the doctor, and Eleanor could not disagree. She had never felt this way before, had never known that loving someone could make the whole world seem brighter and fuller of possibility. Harrison was courting her properly, but there was no doubt about the depth of his feelings. He looked at her like she hung the moon, treated her with a respect and tenderness that made her heart ache. When she was tired from a long day of treating patients, he would rub her shoulders and listen to her talk about her cases. When he was worried about the ranch or money, he would confide in her, trusting her judgment and valuing her advice. 3 months after the blizzard that brought them together, Harrison asked Eleanor to go riding with him out to a ridge overlooking the Parker Ranch. It was a beautiful spring day, the prairie coming alive with wildflowers and new grass. They rode together on Harrison's gelding, Eleanor sitting in front of him as she had that first day, his arms secure around her. At the ridge, Harrison helped her down and spread a blanket on the ground. They sat together, looking out over the rolling land, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance. Harrison was quiet, his hand holding Eleanor's, his thumb rubbing small circles on her palm. "I have been thinking," Harrison said finally, "about us, about the future." Eleanor's heart began to race. "What have you been thinking?" Harrison turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Eleanor. I have loved you since that day in the cabin when you were suffering but stayed strong anyway. I love your courage and your compassion, your stubbornness and your strength. I love how you care for people, how you stand up for what is right even when it is hard." He took a deep breath. "I want to spend my life with you. I want to build a home together, have a family. I know you have your practice and I have the ranch, but I think we can make it work. I will support you in your work and you can support me in mine. We will be partners in every sense of the word." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now. "Harrison." "I am not done," Harrison said, a nervous smile on his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know I am just a cowboy and you are an educated woman, a doctor. But I promise I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. I will love you and support you and stand beside you for the rest of my life." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Eleanor Morgan, will you marry me?" Eleanor was nodding before he even finished speaking. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I love you, Harrison. You are the best man I have ever known, and I want nothing more than to spend my life with you." Harrison let out a whoop of joy and slipped the ring onto Eleanor's finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. They fell back onto the blanket together, kissing and laughing, wrapped in each other's arms under the wide Wyoming sky. "I cannot believe you are going to be my wife," Harrison murmured, stroking Eleanor's hair as she lay with her head on his chest. "I cannot believe I am going to have a husband," Eleanor said. "I never thought I would find someone who accepted all of me, who did not want me to change." "I would not change a thing about you," Harrison said, "except maybe your tendency to go out in blizzards." Eleanor laughed and swatted his chest. "That was one time too many," Harrison said, catching her hand and bringing it to his lips. "These hands are too important to risk. They heal people. They save lives." He kissed each fingertip gently. "And they are mine to hold now for the rest of our lives." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Lusk. The whole town turned out for the wedding, eager to celebrate the union of their beloved doctor and Tom Parker's nephew. Eleanor wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Harrison wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar. When Eleanor walked down the aisle, Harrison's face lit up with such joy that several people in the congregation had to wipe their eyes. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Eleanor with a tenderness that promised years of love to come. The reception was held at the Parker Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food enough to feed an army. Tom Parker gave a toast that had everyone laughing, reminiscing about finding Harrison as a scrawny boy and watching him grow into a man worthy of a woman like Eleanor. Mrs. Henderson toasted Eleanor, thanking her for all the lives she had saved and wishing her a lifetime of happiness with her new husband. As the sun began to set, Harrison and Eleanor snuck away from the party, walking hand in hand toward the small house Harrison had been building on the edge of the Parker property. It was not large, just 4 rooms and a porch, but Harrison had built it himself with help from his uncle and some ranch hands. There was a main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom, a small study that Eleanor could use for seeing patients, and a spare room for the children they both hoped to have. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," Harrison said, sweeping Eleanor up into his arms and carrying her across the threshold. Eleanor laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I like the sound of that, Mrs. Lawson." Harrison set her down gently in the middle of their new home, then cupped her face in his hands. "I love you," he said simply. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for finding me," Eleanor said, "for saving me." "You saved me too," Harrison said. "I was just existing before you came into my life. Now I am living." They made love that night as husband and wife, tender and passionate, learning each other's bodies with the same care they had taken in learning each other's hearts. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, Eleanor's head on Harrison's chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I am so happy," Eleanor whispered. "Me too," Harrison said. "So happy it almost scares me." Eleanor propped herself up on her elbow, looking down at her husband in the moonlight streaming through the window. "Do not be scared. We have each other now. Whatever comes, we will face it together." Harrison pulled her down for a kiss. "Together," he agreed. "Always." Their first year of marriage was an adjustment, as they learned to blend their lives. Eleanor continued her medical practice, seeing patients in the study Harrison had built for her. But she also helped out on the ranch when she could, riding with Harrison to check on cattle or assisting with births during calving season. Harrison learned to cook, so Eleanor could have hot meals waiting when she came home from emergency calls, and he became known throughout the county as the cowboy who was not afraid to support his wife's career. There were challenges, of course. Some of the older ranchers grumbled about Harrison being too soft, letting his wife work instead of keeping her home where she belonged. Some of Eleanor's patients were uncomfortable with her being married, worried that she would not be as available now that she had a husband. But Harrison and Eleanor faced each criticism together, presenting a united front that eventually wore down most of the opposition. Tom Parker was a frequent visitor to their home, clearly delighted with how things had turned out. He had no children of his own, and he told Harrison privately that he intended to leave the ranch to him and Eleanor when he passed. "You two are the closest thing to family I have got," Tom said one evening over supper. "And I know you will do right by the place. Keep it running, keep it strong." "We will, Uncle Tom," Harrison promised, "though I hope that day is a long way off." We all hope that, Eleanor added, reaching over to squeeze the old rancher's hand. You are family to us too. When Eleanor discovered she was pregnant a year and a half after their wedding, Harrison was beside himself with joy. He immediately became overprotective, worrying about Eleanor overworking herself, insisting she cut back on her patient load. Eleanor tolerated his hovering with amused patience, knowing it came from love. I am a doctor, Harrison, she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from helping with a difficult birth. I know what I am doing. The baby is fine and I am fine. I know, Harrison said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. I just worry. You are carrying the most precious thing in the world to me. Eleanor softened, taking his hands. I know you worry, but you need to trust me. I will not take unnecessary risks. I will know when to slow down. She was true to her word, gradually reducing her hours as her pregnancy progressed. By the time she was 7 months along, she was only seeing emergencies and letting a young doctor who had recently arrived in Lusk handle most of the regular patients. Harrison had converted the spare room into a nursery, building a beautiful cradle from oak and painting the walls a soft yellow. Eleanor went into labor on a warm July evening. Harrison had been out checking cattle when she sent one of the ranch hands to fetch him. He came riding in at a gallop, his face pale with worry to find Eleanor calm and in control, timing her contractions with a pocket watch. It is time, she said simply. Would you get Mrs. Henderson? She has agreed to help with the birth. The next 12 hours were the longest of Harrison's life. He stayed by Eleanor's side through it all, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement when the pain was worst. Mrs. Henderson managed the actual birth with the efficiency of a woman who had delivered dozens of babies. But it was Harrison's presence that Eleanor focused on, his gray eyes steady and calm as he repeated the words he had spoken in the cabin all those months ago. I have got you. You are doing so well. I have got you. Their son was born just after dawn, letting out a lusty cry that filled the house with sound. Harrison cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. You have a healthy boy, Mrs. Henderson announced, placing the baby in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at her son, overwhelmed with love. He had Harrison's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair, and when he wrapped his tiny hand around Eleanor's finger, she felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He is perfect, Eleanor whispered. Harrison knelt beside the bed, one arm around Eleanor, one finger gently stroking their son's cheek. He is beautiful, like his mama. They named him Henry Thomas Lawson, Henry for Harrison's father and Thomas for his uncle. Tom Parker cried unashamedly when they told him, and became a devoted grandfather figure, visiting almost daily to hold the baby and tell him stories about the ranch he would one day inherit. 2 years later, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Emma Rose. She was smaller than Henry had been, more delicate, with Eleanor's green eyes and a serious expression that made everyone laugh. Henry, now a toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with every aspect of her care. Gentle, Harrison would remind his son as Henry tried to pat the baby's head with enthusiastic force. She is little. We have to be gentle. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, ranch and patience, long days and longer nights. Harrison took over more of the ranch management as Tom Parker aged, and eventually the old rancher peacefully passed away in his sleep at the age of 78. He left everything to Harrison and Eleanor, just as he had promised, and they renamed the spread the Parker Lawson Ranch in his honor. Eleanor continued to practice medicine, though she adjusted her schedule around her children. She trained 2 younger doctors to help carry the load, and together they established a proper clinic in Lusk, with separate rooms for examinations and a small surgery suite. Harrison was immensely proud of what his wife had built, and he made sure everyone knew how lucky the town was to have her. The years passed, full and rich. Henry grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and the cattle, following his father everywhere and learning everything Harrison could teach him. Emma proved to have her mother's gift for healing, watching Eleanor work with fascination and declaring at age 5 that she was going to be a doctor just like her mama. Eleanor and Harrison had 2 more children, a son they named Samuel who came when Emma was 3, and another daughter named Grace who arrived when Eleanor was 32. Through it all, Harrison and Eleanor's love for each other only deepened. They still made time for each other despite the demands of children and work, still took rides out to their special ridge to watch the sunset, still talked late into the night about their dreams and fears. Harrison still held Eleanor's hands like they were precious, still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Eleanor still marveled that she had found a man who accepted all of her, who encouraged her to be her full self. "You ever regret it?" Harrison asked one night as they sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. The children were all asleep, the ranch was quiet, and they had stolen this moment just for themselves. Marrying a cowboy, tying yourself to this life. Eleanor turned to look at her husband, at the lines time had etched around his eyes and mouth, at the gray beginning to show at his temples. He was as handsome to her now as he had been that day he found her in the blizzard, maybe more so because now she knew every part of him, every strength and weakness, every joy and sorrow. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Harrison Lawson. You and our children and this life we have built together." Harrison smiled and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I feel the same way. I think about that day I found you in the snow, how close I came to not riding out that direction, how easy it would have been to miss you entirely. And I thank God every day that I found you, that you let me help you, that you gave me a chance." "You held my hands when they were frozen blue," Eleanor said softly, "and you told me you had me. You have been holding me ever since in 100 different ways." "I will never let go," Harrison promised, "not in this life or the next." They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands the way they had done countless times before, connected by touch and love and the life they had built together. Around them, the prairie stretched away into the night, vast and eternal. Inside the house, their children slept safe and sound. And on the porch, Harrison and Eleanor held each other close, grateful for the storm that had brought them together, grateful for every moment since. Years continued to pass, bringing with them all the joys and sorrows that life offers. They celebrated Henry's 18th birthday and watched him take on more responsibility on the ranch, proving himself as capable as his father. Emma went east to medical school, the first woman from Wyoming to do so, and Eleanor and Harrison nearly burst with pride at her graduation. Samuel showed a talent for horses, training them with a patience and skill that reminded everyone of Harrison. Grace, the youngest, had her mother's stubborn independence and her father's kind heart, and she announced at 15 that she intended to be a veterinarian. "How did we get so lucky with our children?" Eleanor asked Harrison one evening. They were in their 40s now, still healthy and active, but aware of the way time was moving forward. "They had a good example," Harrison said. "They saw their parents love each other, support each other, work together. That matters more than anything else we could have taught them." Eleanor and Harrison also watched their town grow and change. Lusk expanded, new buildings going up, new families arriving. The railroad came through, bringing with it easier access to supplies and markets. The clinic Eleanor had established became a proper hospital, with multiple doctors on staff and a training program for nurses. Eleanor's reputation spread throughout Wyoming and beyond, and she was invited to speak at medical conferences in Denver and San Francisco, though she rarely accepted, preferring to stay close to home. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Eleanor with a trip to Denver. They left the ranch in Henry's capable hands and took the train east, spending a week in the city seeing the sights and enjoying time alone together. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at expensive restaurants, and went to the theater, playing at being sophisticated city folk before happily returning to their ranch and their real life. "I love our adventures," Eleanor said on the train ride home, her head resting on Harrison's shoulder. "But I love our ordinary days even more." "Me too," Harrison agreed. "Coming home to you every evening, watching our children grow, working the land together. That is the real adventure. Everything else is just window dressing." When Eleanor was 48, a young doctor arrived in Lusk fresh from medical school. His name was Dr. James Mitchell, and he was eager to learn from Eleanor, whose reputation had reached even the medical colleges back east. Eleanor took him under her wing, teaching him everything she knew about practicing medicine in the West, about treating everything from gunshot wounds to influenza to difficult births. "You have built something remarkable here," James said one day as they finished treating a rancher's infected hand. "Most doctors would have given up trying to practice in a place like this, especially a woman doctor. But you persevered, and now look what you have created. A real hospital, trained staff, equipment and medicines that rival anything in Denver." "I had help," Eleanor said, thinking of Harrison and all the ways he had supported her over the years. "You cannot build something like this alone. You need people who believe in you, who stand beside you when things get hard." As Eleanor approached 50, she began to think about slowing down. Her hands, which had frozen blue all those years ago, sometimes ached in cold weather, and she found herself tiring more easily than she used to. She started transitioning more of her patients to the younger doctors, focusing on teaching and consultation rather than direct treatment. Harrison noticed the change and supported it, just as he had supported every decision Eleanor had made over the years. "You have given enough," he told her. "You have saved hundreds of lives, trained dozens of doctors, built a hospital from nothing. You have earned the right to rest." But Eleanor did not want to rest entirely. She continued to see select patients, continued to teach, continued to be available for emergencies. Medicine was too much a part of her identity to give up completely, just as ranching was too much a part of Harrison's. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the land around them. But the love between them remained strong and vital, a constant in a changing world. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening, still looked at each other like they were the best thing in each other's lives. Emma came home from her practice in Cheyenne with a husband, a nice young lawyer who treated her with respect and clearly adored her. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from the next county, a practical woman who was not afraid of hard work. Henry remained a bachelor, married to the ranch in a way that reminded Eleanor of Tom Parker, pouring all his energy and passion into making the Parker Lawson Ranch the finest spread in the territory. Grace went to veterinary school and came back to start the first veterinary practice in the county, working with animals large and small. Eleanor and Harrison became grandparents, and then great-grandparents, their house always full of visiting children and the sound of laughter. They watched Wyoming transition from territory to state, saw the Wild West they had known begin to fade into legend. The cattle drives became less frequent. The gunfights that had once plagued the territory disappeared. The rough edges of frontier life were smoothed away by progress and civilization. "Do you miss it?" Eleanor asked Harrison one evening. They were in their 70s now, both still mobile but slowing down, spending more time on the porch than on horseback. The old days when things were wilder. Harrison thought about it. "Some parts," he admitted. "I miss Tom, miss the friends we have lost over the years. But I do not miss the danger, the uncertainty. And I am glad our grandchildren are growing up in a world that is a little safer, a little more settled." He took Eleanor's hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern on her palm. "Mostly I am just grateful for every day I have had with you. That has been my real adventure, Eleanor, loving you." Eleanor leaned over and kissed her husband, her best friend, her partner in all things. "Mine too," she whispered. "Mine too." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by family. Their 4 children and their spouses, 12 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren all gathered at the ranch for a party that lasted 2 days. There were speeches and toasts, stories and laughter, and through it all Harrison and Eleanor sat together, holding hands, watching the family they had created. "You did good, Doc," Mrs. Henderson said. She was ancient now, well into her 90s, but she had insisted on attending. "You found a good man, raised good children, and saved a whole lot of lives along the way. That is a life well lived." "It has been," Eleanor agreed, looking at Harrison. "It really has been." In their final years, Eleanor and Harrison spent most of their time on their porch, watching the sun rise and set over the prairie they loved. They had handed the ranch over to Henry, who ran it with the same dedication Harrison had shown. Emma visited often, bringing her medical journals to discuss cases with her mother. Samuel and his wife lived in the house next door, close enough to help when needed. Grace had built her veterinary clinic on the edge of the property, and she stopped by every day to check on her parents. "We are surrounded by love," Eleanor said one evening as they watched the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We always have been," Harrison said. "From that first day in the cabin when I held your hands and promised I had you. I have kept that promise, Eleanor. Every day of our lives together." "I know," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "And I have held you too in my own way. We have held each other." They were sitting on that same porch on a cool autumn evening when Eleanor's heart simply stopped. She had been laughing at something Harrison said, her face turned toward him, her hand in his. And then she was gone, slipping away so peacefully that Harrison did not immediately realize it had happened. When he did, when he felt the change in her hand, saw the stillness in her face, he gathered her into his arms and held her close, tears streaming down his face. "I have got you," he whispered, just as he had whispered it so many times before. "I have got you, my love, I have got you." Eleanor was buried on the ridge overlooking the ranch, the same ridge where Harrison had proposed all those years ago. The whole county came to the funeral, people whose lives Eleanor had touched, whose children she had delivered, whose illnesses she had cured. They stood in the autumn sunshine and celebrated a woman who had broken barriers and saved lives, who had been a devoted wife and mother and friend. Harrison stood at her grave after everyone else had left, his hand resting on the simple headstone. He was 83 years old, and he had loved one woman his entire adult life. He did not know how to be in the world without her, but he was not alone for long. 3 months later, on a cold December morning, Henry found his father on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, peaceful in death. He had gone in the night, quietly slipping away to join the woman he had loved for more than 50 years. In his hand was a letter he had written to his children. The letter talked about love and loss, about the joy of a life lived with purpose and meaning. It talked about the importance of finding someone who makes you better, who stands beside you through every storm. And it ended with the story of the blizzard, of finding a half-frozen woman on the prairie and holding her hands as they warmed, of falling in love with her courage and strength. Love is about holding on, Harrison had written. When times are hard, when the world is cold and frightening, you hold on to the people you love. You tell them you have got them, and you mean it with every fiber of your being. That is what your mother and I did for each other every day of our lives. Hold on to each other, children. Tell the people you love that you have got them, and then prove it day after day, year after year, for as long as you have breath in your body. Harrison was buried beside Eleanor on the ridge, and the whole family gathered once more to say goodbye. They told stories about the couple who had built the ranch and the hospital, who had raised 4 strong children and created a legacy that would last for generations. They talked about the love that had sustained Harrison and Eleanor through 53 years of marriage, a love that had been tested and proved true time and again. They were lucky to find each other, Emma said through her tears, standing between her brothers and sister as they looked out over the land their parents had loved. They were, Henry agreed, but it was not just luck. They worked at their love, chose each other every day, supported each other through everything. That is why it lasted. The years continued to pass, and the Parker Lawson Ranch thrived under Henry's management and eventually under his nephews after him. The hospital Eleanor had founded grew into a regional medical center, treating patients from across Wyoming and beyond. Emma's children and grandchildren became doctors, carrying on the legacy. Grace's veterinary clinic became the largest in the state. Samuel's descendants continued to raise and train horses, known throughout the region for their quality and temperament. And on the ridge overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, weathering slowly in the wind and sun. Visitors to the ranch, family and friends, and eventually tourists interested in the history of the Old West, would climb the ridge to see where the famous lady doctor and her cowboy husband were buried. They would read the simple inscription on the shared stone: Harrison Lawson and Eleanor Morgan Lawson together in life, together in eternity. I've got you. People who knew the story would tell it to those who did not. The tale of the blizzard and the frozen hands, of the cowboy who saved the doctor, and the love that grew from that desperate moment. It became part of the ranch's history, part of the town's folklore, a story passed down through generations. But more than that, it became a reminder of what love could be when it was true and strong and faithful. Harrison and Eleanor's story was not about grand gestures or dramatic romance, though there had been elements of both. It was about showing up every day, holding hands through good times and bad, saying, "I have got you," and meaning it with everything you had. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on parts of the ranch, still practiced medicine in the hospital Eleanor had founded, still trained horses and treated animals using the methods Samuel and Grace had pioneered. The legacy was not just in the land or the buildings, but in the way these descendants loved each other and their families, the way they showed up for each other when things got hard. On winter evenings when the wind howled across the prairie, when snow piled high and the temperature dropped below zero, people in Lusk would sometimes tell the story of the blizzard of 1883, when Dr. Eleanor Morgan nearly froze to death and was saved by a cowboy named Harrison Lawson. They would talk about how he held her frozen hands and told her he had her, how that moment changed both their lives forever. And somewhere, perhaps on a ridge overlooking a ranch that still bore their name, perhaps in the gentle touch of a great-grandchild holding a patient's hand, perhaps in the whisper of wind through prairie grass, Harrison and Eleanor's love endured. not as a ghost story or a sad memory, but as a living thing, passed down through the generations like a precious inheritance. Because real love does not die when the lovers do. It transforms, flowing into the children and grandchildren, into the work they did and the lives they touched, into the very land they walked on and the sky they gazed at. Harrison and Eleanor's love had started with frozen hands and a desperate rescue, but it had grown into something that touched hundreds of lives, that built institutions and raised families, that made the world a little bit better. And that, in the end, was the real story. Not just that a cowboy saved a doctor in a blizzard, though he did. Not just that they fell in love and married and had a family, though they did all those things. The real story was that they chose each other, every single day, through 53 years of marriage and all the joys and sorrows that came with it. They held each other's hands through everything life threw at them, and they never let go. The Parker Lawson Ranch still stood more than a century later, testament to the vision and hard work of Harrison and Eleanor and all who came after them. The hospital was now called the Eleanor Morgan Lawson Medical Center, a state-of-the-art facility that served the entire region. And on the ridge where they were buried, where Harrison had once proposed and where they now rested together for eternity, wildflowers grew in the spring and summer, painting the ground in brilliant colors. People still climbed the ridge sometimes, descendants and history buffs and romantics who had heard the story. They would stand by the grave and look out over the land, trying to imagine what it had been like in those early days when the West was still wild, when a woman practicing medicine was revolutionary, when a cowboy's promise to hold someone's hands could be the beginning of a love story for the ages. And if the wind was right, if the moment was quiet enough, they swore they could feel it, that sense of enduring love that seemed to emanate from the very earth. They could almost see Harrison and Eleanor walking hand in hand across the prairie, young and strong and full of hope. They could almost hear Harrison's deep voice saying those words that had meant so much. "I have got you." Because in the end, that was what love was. Not grand gestures or flowery poetry, though those had their place. Love was showing up. Love was holding hands when they were frozen blue, and saying, "I have got you," and meaning it. Love was staying through the hard times, celebrating through the good times, and never letting go, not even when death itself came calling. Harrison and Eleanor knew that truth, lived it every day of their lives together. And in doing so, they left behind something far more precious than land or buildings or money. They left behind a legacy of love, an example of what a partnership could be when two people truly committed to each other. Their story became the story their children told their grandchildren, who told their grandchildren, passing it down like a treasured heirloom. And every time the story was told, every time someone repeated those words, "I have got you," Harrison and Eleanor's love lived again, as vital and powerful as it had been on that day in 1883, when a cowboy found a half-frozen doctor in a blizzard and held her hands until they warmed. That was the real miracle, the real magic. Not just that they survived, not just that they fell in love, but that their love proved strong enough to weather every storm that came after. For 53 years they held each other, supported each other, loved each other with a devotion that inspired everyone who knew them. And when they finally let go of this life, they did it knowing they had lived fully, loved completely, and built something that would endure long after they were gone. The sun set over the Wyoming prairie, as it had done every evening for millions of years, and would continue to do for millions more. But on this evening, as the light painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as the wind whispered through the grass, and the last birds called their evening songs, it seemed to carry with it the echo of a promise made long ago. I have got you. 3 simple words, but they contained everything. Love and commitment, strength and tenderness, a promise to hold on through whatever came. Harrison had said those words to Eleanor in her darkest moment, and he had spent the rest of his life proving them true. She had said them back in her own way, through her actions and choices, through the life they built together. And now, more than a century later, those words still resonated. In the hospital where doctors held patients' hands and promised they would make it through. In the ranch, where family members supported each other through hard times and good. In the homes throughout Lusk and beyond, where people loved each other with the kind of devotion Harrison and Eleanor had shown was possible. The story of when her hands were frozen blue, when the cowboy held them tight and said, "I have got you," was more than just a story. It was a reminder of what really mattered in life. Not wealth or status, not perfection or ease, but love. Real, true, enduring love that showed up every day and held on tight and never, ever let go. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as the prairie settled into its evening quiet, that love remained. In the land, in the buildings, in the people who carried Harrison and Eleanor's legacy forward. Most of all, it remained in the promise they had made to each other and kept faithfully until the very end. I have got you. Forever.